I'm back with our first chapter read from Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. We're going to read one chapter each session, and I'll post new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so you'll get 2 chapters every week. One on Tuesday, one on Thursday. Remember that this time we're doing our novel study, we're focusing on predictions. So each chapter, I'm going to ask you the same questions. Your questions look like this. Your novel study predictions, remembering that we're working on using what we know about the book to make a smart guess about what might happen next. So chapter 1 says, was your prediction from the last chapter correct? What parts were right or wrong? Now, you can't answer this one yet because you didn't make a prediction in the first chapter. But keep this in mind because you're going to have to use it every other time. Number 2, which is the only one you'll be doing this week, says, write a prediction for the next chapter. So it's asking you, what do you think is going to happen in the next chapter? What characters do you think will come back? Which ones do you think we'll see? What kind of activities might they do? And will they get into any trouble or will they solve their problems? Who knows? All right, well, let's get into it. I'm going to read first the back part of the book that gives you a little idea of what might happen in the story. The back of the book says, the classic story beloved by millions. So a lot of people have already read this book. It's a little bit older, but it's still a great novel. Wilbur is no ordinary pig. When he was just a piglet, he was rescued from a terrible fate by Fern, the farmer's daughter. Now he's all grown up, and his life is threatened once again. But he has a unique new friend in Charlotte, the wise spider, and she has a plan that just might save him. So it looks like this is Wilbur, and this is Charlotte. That's what we know for now. Let's read the first chapter. I hope you're as excited as I am. Here we go. Chapter 1, Before Breakfast. Where's Papa going with that axe? Said Fern to her mother as they were setting up the table for breakfast. Out to the hog house, replied Mrs. Arabelle. Some pigs were born last night. I don't see why he needs an axe, continued Fern, who was only 8. Well, said her mother, one of the pigs is a runt. It's very small and weak. It will never amount to anything. So your father has decided to do away with it. Do away with it? Shrieked Fern. You mean kill it? Just because it's smaller than the others? Mrs. Arabelle put a pitcher of cream on the table. Don't yell, Fern, she said. Your father is right. The pig would probably die anyway. Fern pushed a chair out of her way and ran outdoors. The grass was wet, and the earth smelled of springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping up by the time she caught up with her father. Sopping means wet. Please don't kill it, she sobbed. It's unfair. Mr. Arabelle stopped walking. Fern, he said gently, you have to learn to control yourself. Control myself, yelled Fern. This is a matter of life and death, and you talk about controlling myself. Tears ran down her cheeks, and she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hand. Fern, said Mr. Arabelle, I know more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now run along. But it's unfair, cried Fern. The pig couldn't help being born small, could it? If I had been very small at birth, would you have killed me? Mr. Arabelle smiled. Certainly not, he said, looking down at his daughter with love. But this is different. A little girl is one thing. A little runty pig is another. I see no difference, replied Fern, still hanging on to the axe. This is the most terrible case of injustice I ever heard of. An odd look came over John Arabelle's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. All right, he said. You go back to the house, and I'll bring the runt when I come in. I'll let you start it on a bottle, like a baby. Then you'll see what trouble a pig can be. When Mr. Arabelle returned to the house half an hour later, he carried a carton under his arm. Fern was upstairs changing her sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast. The room smelled of coffee, bacon, damp plaster, and wood smoke from the stove. "Put it on her chair," said Mrs. Arabelle. Mr. Arabelle set the carton down at Fern's place. Then he walked to the sink and washed his hands, and dried them on the roller towel. Fern came slowly down the stairs. Her eyes were red from crying. As she approached her chair, the carton wobbled. There was a scratching noise. Fern looked at her father. Then she lifted the lid of the carton. There, inside, looking up at her, was the newborn pig. It was a white one. The morning light shone through its ears, turning them pink. "He's yours," said Mr. Arabelle, saved from an untimely death. Fern couldn't take her eyes off the tiny pig. "Oh," she whispered, "oh, look at him. He's absolutely perfect." She closed the carton carefully. First, she kissed her father, then she kissed her mother. Then she opened the lid again, lifted the pig out, and held it against her cheek. At this very moment, her brother Avery came into the room. Avery was 10. He was heavily armed, and with an air rifle in one hand and a wooden dagger in the other. "What's that?" he demanded. "What's Fern got?" "She's got a guest for breakfast," said Mrs. Arabelle. "Wash your hands and face, Avery." "Let's see it," said Avery, setting his gun down. "You call that miserable thing a pig? That's a fine specimen of a pig. It's no bigger than a white rat." "Wash up and eat your breakfast, Avery," he said to his mother. "The school bus will be along in half an hour." "Can I have a pig too, Pop?" asked Avery. "No, I only distribute pigs to early risers," said Mr. Arabelle. "Fern was up at daylight, trying to rid the world of injustice. As a result, she now has a pig. A small one, to be sure, but nevertheless, a pig. It just shows what can happen if a person gets out of bed early enough. Let's eat." But Fern couldn't eat until her pig had had a drink of milk. Mrs. Arabelle found a baby's nursing bottle. She poured warm milk into the bottle and fitted on the top and handed it to Fern. "Give him his breakfast," she said. A minute later, Fern was seated on the floor in the corner of her kitchen with her infant between her knees, teaching it to suck from the bottle. The pig, although tiny, had a good appetite and caught on quickly. The school bus honked from the road. "Run!" commanded Mrs. Arabelle, taking the pig from Fern and slipping a donut into her hand. Avery grabbed another donut. The children ran out to the road and climbed into the bus. Fern took no notice of the others in the bus. She just sat and stared out of the window, thinking what a blissful world it was and how lucky she was to have changed the entire life of a pig. By the time the bus reached school, Fern had named her pet, selecting the most beautiful name she could think of. "Its name is Wilbur," she whispered to herself. She was still thinking about the pig when her teacher said, "Fern, what is the capital of Pennsylvania?" "Wilbur," replied Fern dreamily. The students giggled. Fern blushed. That's the end of chapter 1, and now our goal is to do some predicting. So keeping in mind the questions, and that you can't do this question for chapter 1, we didn't have a past chapter, I would like you to write a new prediction for what might happen in the next chapter. So now we know that Fern has a baby pig. Avery doesn't seem to be too happy about it. I'm not sure if that'll be important or not. But I want you to guess what might happen. And remember that at the back of the book, we talked about Charlotte, the spider. Do you think she's going to come in soon? Do you think she'll come in later? Let me know your guess. All right. See you next time.